Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining. I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to jump in. I can see attendees still increasing there. And then I'll get us started. So, a very warm welcome to you all. Welcome to Insight PBS's Positive Pathway webinar series. My name is Jess Kaufman-Wood. I'm the General Manager here at Insight, and I'm just delighted to have you join us today. This series really has been designed to lay the foundation for understanding and implementing positive behaviour support. And our goal really is just to introduce you to some core concepts, some practical strategies that can empower professionals, families, community members alike, and drive positive change for the people that we all support. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are meeting from today. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now today we are very privileged to be joined by the wonderful Bridget, who is one of our incredible advanced practitioners here at Insight and is extremely knowledgeable in this topic that we're going to be presenting today on supported decision making. So the way that today's session will work is that I'll shortly hand over to Bridget to deliver the main presentation. It'll be approximately 45 minutes or so. And then we encourage you to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function here that you can hopefully see on your screens. I'll be monitoring that chat and may address some questions during the presentation if I know the answer to it and can support. Otherwise, we'll have a dedicated 10 or so minutes of Q&A at the end to discuss some of the questions in a bit more detail. So if we don't get around to them all, you're absolutely more than welcome to email us and we can get back to you when we can. And just a note that this webinar is being recorded and a replay will be sent to all registered attendees, usually within 24 hours. So without further ado, I will hand over to Bridget to begin today's presentation on supported decision making.
Thank you, Jess. Okay, let's get started. So during this presentation, I want us to think of elevating voice and choice in behaviour support. So let's go to the next slide. I know there's still some people joining. As Jess said, my name is Bridget. I'm an advanced PBS practitioner at Insight. And today I want to look at supported decision-making in practice, a practical application in PBS. We'll talk a little bit about me first. And a little disclaimer, I did spend the weekend at the football in the cold, screaming and shouting. So my voice is a bit hoarse today and it might be a bit croaky. So please forgive me. I have a drink here and I might have a little bit of a cough. But I've worked as a PBS practitioner at Insight for 2 years. Tomorrow, it's my anniversary. But my employment and education started in nursing, in clinical settings, then community, aged care, disability and diagnostics. And eventually I went back to uni to study psychology, justice and criminology. So it's been quite a journey and I'm currently doing my postgraduate study in counselling. So I love all things human rights related, so I'm excited to talk about SDM. Unfortunately, the title leaves me a little bit tongue-tied, so I'm going to refer to it as SDM moving forward. Welcome to everyone watching, and thank you, Jess, again for the introduction. All right, so SDM is a model that enables people with disability to make or participate in decisions about their own lives with the support of trusted people. So those people could be us, the allied health therapists, practitioners. It could be care teams. It could be you, the family members. It could be peers. And we also try to implement tools and strategies rather than just having decisions made for people. So let's have a look at what that means for PBS. Historically, there wasn't much legislation driving or governing human rights in the disability sector, and there were quite a few movements pushing to have the voices of people with disability heard. So SDM began to recognize that all people have the right to make decisions, even if they need support to do so. And this was further enforced by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Let's look at a bit of history behind that. SDM began to move us away from substitute decision-making, example, guardianship and administration where it wasn't really necessary, and more toward autonomy. And this is only possible by supporting the person. So we'll have a look at what inspired this movement. Supported decision-making fits into the positive behavior support framework. It is person-centered and human rights-based practice. It is founded on person-centered values and respect for human rights. SDM operationalizes these principles by ensuring the person is actively involved in decisions about their life, rather than having decisions made for them. So we're walking alongside the person. Next slide, thanks, Jess. A lot of us as practitioners, and maybe you, family out there, would know of people or participants, clients and consumers who would have come from the old system of disability support. And if you think about that old system of institutionalization without consent, there was a lot of systemic discrimination and exclusion in those systems. Those people experienced a lack of access to education, employment, and healthcare. And there were even worse scenarios where there was forced sterilization and other medical abuses. So there are many people in the disability sector who survived the denial of legal capacity and decision-making rights, were subjected to forced sterilization and other medical abuses, and this often resulted in social isolation, poverty, and stigma. So moving forward, we think about how in care settings previously, so community housing, clinical environments, for example, people had historically been denied agency, and substitute decision-making, such as guardianship and administration, was almost automatic. However, SDM recognizes the dignity of risk while also maintaining duty of care. And we acknowledge that learning from decisions is a human right. It prevents overreach, which I'll talk about in a second, by services, and it promotes quality of life. And I love this little saying. It says, "Nothing about me without me." So what does overreach look like? Overreach can be things like staff routinely making choices on the person's behalf. Example, where they live, what they eat, who they see, without actually offering support to make decisions or express their own decisions. Decisions are made without checking the person's understanding or preferences. An example could be a teenager with autism who's not included in decisions about their transition from out-of-home care, because there's this preconceived idea that because of their age or disability, they won't understand or they'll just get upset. So often we see that in order to minimize reaction, response, or behaviors of concern or frustration, decisions are made for people without actually taking into consideration their preferences and will or their capacity to understand. Let's look at some more examples. So what SDM is not, it's not letting people do whatever they want where they may find themselves in harm's way. It is not just asking questions and offering two choices. It's not advocacy in the way that advocacy is done on behalf of someone, so you're speaking for them, while SDM is done with someone. So we come back to that. We're walking alongside the person in their decision-making process. Overprotective or risk-averse cultures is something that we encounter when we're trying to help people understand supported decision-making. So occasionally we may find as parents, support workers, stakeholders, PBS practitioners, that services restrict activities or limit the person's choices due to perceived risk rather than using SDM. So the person is not supported to try and fail and learn from their own decisions. An example of this would be a young person with a history of aggression. They're not allowed to handle money or cook, even though they've shown interest in these activities and are developing skills. Sometimes it's easier for us to just say no, to limit or minimize the amount of risk to that person or the behaviors we may have to manage or deal with. However, by doing that, we're inadvertently disempowering the person and we're somewhat preventing skill building and capacity building. So SDM involves relational, ongoing, and scaffolded support to participate in meaningful decisions. When we talk about scaffolding, it can refer to support that we as providers, carers, and peers offer when a person is learning a new skill or trying to accomplish something. And in SDM, you are helping the person to make decision about their lives and then build on that ability to have more choice and control of their care. So at Insight, as PBS practitioners, we may make recommendations based on evidence-based research to help you support the people you love and care for, or the clients that you're walking alongside on their NDIS journey. But everything we do ultimately comes down to support. All right, so how do we embed SDM in our behavior support plans? So a PBS practitioner may identify areas where the person can meaningfully participate. We can gather information through our assessments, interviews, and observations. We might find out that every person communicates differently and each person has a unique functional capacity. And then we consider all these factors like how a person communicates, whether it's verbal, non-verbal, but vocal, like echolalia, sign or body language, with assistive technology or through a trusted person. We seek to understand how the person can be supported to make decisions. We'll look at other ways we do this as well. So when we go to create a behavior support plan, we might include strategies that build decision-making. We aim to enable communication of preference. We want to reduce learned helplessness or compliance. And with this one, I think back to when I was talking about the older system in disability support, a lot of people were subjected to very strict, rigid routines, and compliance was a very big factor to that. So I've had a participant who transitioned into a more supportive environment, but still was hesitant to make decisions because they were used to not being supported. We also aim to increase autonomy and increase choice and control. So the overuse of restrictive practices. A lot of the time when we first meet with care teams, families, stakeholders, there may be restrictive practices in place simply because there hasn't been any other way to manage or deal with behaviours, frustrations, and inability to communicate. So services may sometimes default to restrictive practices rather than trialing supported decision-making, and behaviours of concern are interpreted or misinterpreted as evidence of incapacity rather than communication of distress and unmet needs. An example may be a participant refuses to engage in therapy and is deemed non-compliant rather than supported to explore other options. So this happens, it's quite common. Participants may be given one or two options which we think works for them, but there isn't enough information to support other things that they may like or enjoy. And if the participant doesn't want to involve themselves in those two options, sometimes it's seen as non-compliant or they're not interested in building their capacity. Whereas if we took time to understand their preferences, we may see that there are more options available to them. Supported decision-making as the alternative. So SDM ensures that will and preference are identified and respected, and support is tailored. So when you see things like visuals in BSP or coaching recommendations or options and time, those are things that have been discovered through being with the person, talking to them, interviewing them, and observations. And sometimes we've recommended the best way that person communicates, and these things are tailored to their preference. So the person can learn from experience, risk is managed with them, not by excluding them. And NDIS practice standards and the UNCRPD both require that support providers presume capacity and support choice and control, not override it. All right, so let's look at SDM in a very simple everyday example. So these are things that appear so simplistic that you and I take for granted every single day. Something like choosing your clothes, your meal, and your routine. So you can imagine when you don't have these options, how frustrating it may be. It could be something as simple as a person prefers a certain sort of food for a reason, and we've just not taken time to discover what their preferences are. And then we may see behaviors as a result of being given something that they wouldn't choose for themselves, or we may see over-compliance because they just don't want to cause any issues or challenges. Another one would be selecting support workers. And I always find this one very interesting if it's met with a bit of pushback. But I think about situations where a person is being supported by someone maybe for 3 days in a row, and they're not a good fit or a good match. And that person has to spend all day with them, and sometimes doing things as intimate as personal hygiene and assistance of daily routines. And maybe there's a lower functional capacity to articulate their preferences. This would be a time where we would really want to understand the person's preferences and support them in decision-making about who cares for them and who does everything for them. Deciding how to spend money or use NDIS funds. So if you're a support coordinator, one of your main roles is to understand the person and then support them to choose services and providers and best spend their funding on things that they need and to reach their goals and build capacity. Another example is opting in and out of social activities. Imagine you have a full care team, lots of stakeholders, everyone wants the best for you. You're being provided an activity every single day. You have OT in the morning, you have the physio, the speech pathologist, you have a specialist support coordinator. Everyone is giving you everything you need and you can get out of your funding, but you may feel overwhelmed. And then people may perceive it as, we are providing you with everything you need to take every opportunity. However, we should really work with the person to fit what's available into how they cope with the amount of things they have going on. And there should be opportunity and space to opt in and out of services, activities, and things that they have to do on a daily basis. And this can happen successfully if people are supported enough to make those decisions. Another really simple one that we may take for granted, but it might mean the world to a participant, is something like choosing where to sit, who to be near, when to say and what to say yes or no to. So these are really, to most of us, really simplistic preferences, but they may have an impact on how a person's day goes. And that may impact how their week goes. And before you know it, you may see responses or reactions from a person which are deemed behaviors of concern, when we really could just address it with supporting the person right from the beginning. So these are decisions that we often streamline for people in high support needs, but they all matter. Let's look at some more examples. Okay, so in a behavior support plan, you may get a recommendation or an example of ways that you can support your participant or person. And this is just one for a 16-year-old adolescent. So it could be something like health and therapy, excuse me, which activities to do in your occupational therapy session or your exercise session, what feels safe and what feels unsafe. So that could be the decision-making opportunity, and how you can support that with a strategy is allow opt-in language or use traffic light systems like yes, no, maybe, to gauge where the person is sitting with their decision-making. Another one could be living arrangements. So what his room looks like, giving the person to have decision-making opportunities around who supports him and what activities he does at home. This can be supported with the strategy of providing photos, walkthroughs, and gradual transitions to build informed choices. So this is just an example, but when you get a behavior support plan, they're all different, but the foundational thing here is that we're aiming to support decision-making. Let's look at more complex examples. So a complex example might be a non-verbal person with behaviors of concern. Imagine this scenario. So you have a 24-year-old man with autism, intellectual disability, and no verbal language. He engages in self-injury when overwhelmed or over-controlled, and he lives in a cell where staff use strict routines. So how would we approach that with SDM? Let's have a look at some strategies. So you could use visual supports to offer structured choices, and this may seem very simple. So example, 3 meal options with photos. However, if staff can track preferences over time, so example, a person is given photos of what activities they could engage in that week, and that person picks swimming 3 times more than they pick bowling, they may be expressing a preference, and then PBS and occupational therapy may be able to collaborate to train staff to recognize consent cues. Example, signs of agreement with something or signs of discomfort with something. Build in time. So I mentioned time before, and again, to us it may seem simplistic, but building in time for the person to pause, indicate preference, instead of rushing and choosing something to be compliant, or in some cases we think they're not going to make a decision, it's too hard to communicate, we'll just choose for them, they like all these things, so we can't go wrong. So this would be SDM, scaffolded participation in decision making, even without spoken language. Let's look at another complex example. A person under guardianship. This is a very common scenario. I've had a few participants with similar challenges. So you have a woman with a psychosocial disability under full guardianship. She has a history of exploitation and risk-taking, and she wants to return to her hometown where she previously used illicit substances. Okay, so we'll look at some SDM approaches for this one. We could explore her reasoning and values. We may find that this participant has a cultural connection to that place. Maybe she has family there, and maybe she's trying to connect with her identity to that place. We could use decision-making conversations with the participant, not just risk assessments. So we tend to focus a lot on risk and exposure to risk. And when we're talking with care teams and stakeholders, it's always very evident that we need to minimize risk all the time. But we can minimize risk and also provide duty of care while supporting a person. So we could involve her in weighing options, such as what supports are available to go with you. Could we compromise and maybe do a visit to the place first? So a day visit to experience the place again and see the logistics involved in getting there. So we're advocating for graduated decision-making, not blanket restrictions, because there is quite often we will go straight to, no, that's not going to work. We know the person's history and background. Things have happened before. This is what they've done. This is what they may be trying to get to. It isn't safe. We don't want to be responsible for the consequences. But going through the process with the person might help the person discover their own decision-making abilities, and it also might help your participant put forward a case for why they want to do something and help you understand them better as a person. Okay, higher complexity, SDM and communication needs. So as I said in the beginning, everyone has a different functional capacity. Everyone has a different way of communicating. Many people require augmented or alternative communication, and supported decision-making can happen through eye gaze, gestures, picture boards, digital tools. Observing patterns over time and trusted relationships where preferences are known are two of the things that can help us understand when people don't verbally communicate the same as everyone else. So our role is to give people time, tools, and trust to express their will and preference, and then build those into their daily lives. And that may be through our PBS behaviour support plans, or it may be through the care plans you have in your person's shared accommodation or housing. Sometimes you can do all these things and still experience staff pushback against SDM, and there's always a reason for this. So people may push back against fear, misunderstanding, lack of training, and organizational culture. This resistance is common, especially in high-risk or crisis-driven environments, but it still leads to disempowerment, overreach, which we talked about before, and even increased behaviors of concern in the person being supported. Okay, so what does this look like? Staff culture and power. You may hear, what if he makes the wrong choice and someone gets hurt? So SDM often fails if staff believe that they know best. And this sometimes is coming from a place of good intention. You may work with people who say, I've known the participant for 10 years. They don't like that. And if we do that, they're going to do this. And if we allow them to do that, they've always done that. But refusing to allow a participant to go outside alone, even though they've never absconded, just in case. So success depends on staff training and reflective practice. To be able to change the old mindset or change people who are stuck in their ways out of fear or misunderstanding, we do need to interact with staff, talk to families, and get to the root of the fear of not allowing your person to make decisions and have their own experiences. We also need to recognize covert disempowerment, and this can be as simple as over-prompting. So if we are always prompting a person in a certain direction, eventually we are making a choice for them. As PBS practitioners, we often need to address these in our strategies and training. So it's normal to worry about safety. Supporting decisions doesn't mean stepping back and allowing risky things to happen. It means stepping with the person, and that goes back to walking alongside a person while they make decisions. Okay, so throughout the process, for all of us working in this sector and for the families as well and schools, we need to acknowledge that as caregivers and stakeholders, we have a legal and ethical duty to support our participants to make healthy decisions, and denying that support is denying a human right. We consider ethical and clinical implications when we're working on our behaviour support plans and trying to embed SDM into our plans. We support the least restrictive practice. We want things to align with the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission expectations. We aim to reduce incidents caused by frustration, boredom, and loss of autonomy. And we hope to improve therapeutic relationships and well-being outcomes. So the key takeaways, I'd say, is to just remember that this is a core human right, and in positive behaviour support, supported decision-making is not just optional, it's foundational. And it's the practice of recognising, respecting, and enabling a person's right to make decisions about their own lives, regardless of disability, communication style, or perceived capacity. And just an end note, I'm sure there's some questions, but SDM is a very broad topic. We could talk all day, Jess. It relates to so many areas of disability support and PBS, but I hope that this has just been a good introduction to the topic. I would think that the goal is to start thinking about how you can implement SDM into your practice, and consider other ways this strategy can help the people you support. So thank you to everyone who's joined in and is listening. I can't see anything. Jess has been very, very good in assisting with me presenting this webinar. So thank you for all your help. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Bridget. That was wonderful. I'll give people a moment if they have any questions to pop them in the chat, but I just wanted to note, coming from a support worker background myself initially, and psychology and then PBS, I just love how you're so, you are able to explain so well the intricacies and the little areas in which supported decision making can be implemented in so many different ways.
So many
from
more
tiny
examples.
little things to big things, it's almost like this whole presentation was a great reflective exercise for hopefully for everyone who's attended, but even myself, and thinking, back when I was doing that, that actually was supported decision making as well, or these are some of the ways that we can, implement it as well. So,
if we had more time, we could actually talk about all the amazing ways that we actually implement this without even knowing. Every day where we support somebody to make a decision and we don't even know that we're using this strategy.
Absolutely. I can see we do have one question in the chat, so I might ask it to you. Should the person be allowed to make, quote unquote, bad decisions and take risks sometimes? Everyone without a disability does not always choose what is perceived as good for them all the time. I think that's such a great.
It is, it is. And it's always a topic of conversation because, one, we have to consider what is a bad decision. So it could be very subjective. And one of the things I always think about is when someone wants to make a bad decision, we have to consider, is that decision bad for us by our standards, or is it harmful to them in some way? And if it is, can we build their capacity to better understand the decision and the consequences? Can we have more conversations around why they want to do the thing? What's inspiring it? What's the need? What's the function of
and
the
I think
thing?
the example here too, thank you, Elizabeth, is around, like, for example, picking unhealthy food.
Okay.
Versus, and like you said, I'm sure there's a whole spectrum of things that, would be considered bad. And how do we weigh that up? It kind of comes into that duty of care versus, what's the other one? It's always duty of care versus
and dignity of risk.
Dignity of risk, that's the one, yes.
I think with healthy food and unhealthy food, I always think like a compromise would be a good starting solution. And also if you have to maybe get a dietitian involved, if it's a child or an adolescent. I know some really good dietitians who work so well with children and adolescents to understand healthy eating and also understand balance and compromise. So things don't have to be a complete no, and we also don't have to allow people to put themselves at risk just to afford them decision making. We could find a way to make a compromise and a balance.
Absolutely. And imagine for everyone, there's a totally, even with something like, unhealthy food, for someone like us at the moment, having a bit of unhealthy food here and there, the risk isn't too great. But, I have worked with a participant in the past where if she ate particular foods, actually that's a serious medical risk. And it was really tricky to navigate that decision making with the support team around, well, if we allow that, she actually might go to hospital, and we, so we can't. So it's so individualized, I suppose, but really great question. I've got another question here, which is, I guess, can you comment on the questions that arise, like does the person have the capacity to make a decision in relation to the implementation of RPs for them, when decision making is sometimes a formal question?
Ah, okay. So I think there are some situations that are so complex because of the person's history and background, and maybe decision making has to be shared by guardians or people who are nominees for that person. In situations like that, there really would be a lot of evidence through assessments. So psychiatrist report, psychology, the functional capacity assessment by the OT, there would be enough evidence that this person is not capable of making such complex decisions that it may inadvertently affect them in a negative way. So I think we'd have to take into consideration the person's complex needs, their history and background, and factors influencing their dignity of risk and duty of care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's also really difficult. I hate giving vague, broad answers, but when we know how much time it takes to understand a person, you can understand the amount of information you need to make a decision yourself. So it would be quite a process to decide who gets to decide in those cases.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that during the presentation too, around time, and I was reflecting on how much patience it really takes to be able to to implement some of those strategies,
Yeah.
and
You
we don't
need
always have that patience,
no,
in
you
certain
need
situations, but
dedicated support workers and really the most intensely dedicated care team, which a lot of people have, and that's really
yeah.
good. So,
Yeah, and that it's a gradual approach as well. And in some of those, more complex examples that you presented as well, that really gradual approach. Let's start out with, firstly unpacking, then is there a little compromise and so on. And, there was a comment here as
yeah.
well around how it must be so difficult to allow somebody to, leave care to access drugs and then have the fallout when they return as well. That's completely
So
understandable.
when you, I think it was Elizabeth's question about unhealthy choices. I'm glad it was food because my mind always goes straight to running away, drug use, self-harm, and things like that, which are really difficult and are the more complex ones. But we can always distinguish between what people can make decisions about on their own and what they need help with if we spend enough time getting to know them.
Oh, that's fantastic. That might be, I can't see any other questions. So that might actually be a really lovely note to end on there. So I might thank you again, Bridget, so much for putting this presentation
I've almost completely lost my voice this week.
Well, luckily it's over, and you've done such an incredible job, and it really was so insightful. You were a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this topic and quite a few other PBS topics, I have to say. But thank you again, and thank you to everyone who attended. You will get the recording. Please do email us at any time if you've got any more questions for us. Otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you back here again for our Positive Pathways series. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.